injustice I suffered as a boy, the injustice I suffered as a boy should never happen to another child. So writes my next guest. His name is Ian Manuel. He spent 15 years in solitary confinement beginning when he was 15 years old. On May the 4th, he will release his memoir, My Time Will Come. Ian, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, Michael.
Your essay in the New York Times caught my eye, my 18 years in solitary confinement. I guess we have to begin with why you were in prison to begin with. What happened when you were 13 years old?
When I was 13 years old, I was placed under some peer pressure to commit a crime and attempted murder, doing an attempted robbery, and a beautiful lady that eventually became my friend was shot doing this attempted robbery in downtown Tampa.
You were in 7th grade.
Yes, sir.
So you shot her in the face. She sustained a really significant injury. I gleaned that it was gang related. Is that fair?
No, it's not. That's not a fair assessment because gangs didn't really exist, at least not in my neighborhood. It was more of a neighborhood thing at the time. And I was, like I said, I was placed under some peer pressure by some older guys to, engage in this robbery. We were friends growing up. Even though I wasn't raised like that, sometimes you commit crimes when you're under the peer pressure of your friends. And I ended up subsequently sentenced to the rest of my life for a crime I committed at the tender age of 13.
Right. You were sent away for life in prison for a crime you committed when you were 13 years old.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And I know it was a serious crime. My victim left the hospital the same night. And, I eventually, when I got to prison, called her. I took the initiative to make a phone call and apologize for my actions. She accepted that collect call. And, we began a correspondence that lasted for several years during my incarceration.
What is it that caused you to be sent to solitary confinement once you were in prison?
A couple things. So initially, due to my age, I was placed in solitary confinement my first day in prison. I went to prison May 10th, 1991, was given the DC number 518907, no longer to be addressed by my name, but by a number. And I was placed in solitary confinement initially for the first 3 weeks based on just my age. However, after that, I was placed in open population with adults at 14 years old. And I kind of rebelled. The officers would yell at me, I'd yell back. I just did typical teenage behavior. I'd walk in the grass. I'd be in unauthorized areas, places I wasn't supposed to be at the time. And I accumulated what the Department of Corrections consider excessive DRs, disciplinary reports, and was placed in long-term solitary confinement at the end of the George H.W. Bush's administration in 1992.
So, Ian, take me in that cell. Take me in that environment that was your world for 18 years, beginning when you were 15. What am I looking at? Who's around me? What does life consist of?
Life consists of mostly 24 hours lockdown. I know on TV they make it look like you get an hour out of your cell a day. That's not always the case. It's 24 hours lockdown. It's watching you and your fellow inmates be starved, being frozen with the air placed on 50 degrees. So, and then you can't cover up from 5 a.m. to 5 p.m. If they catch you covered up under your blanket between the hours of 5 a.m. and 5 p.m., they'll strip you of all your clothing except your boxers, and then they will spray you with high-powered chemical agents that makes your body feel like it's roasting in an oven. I've seen people cut their stomachs open and stick forks and forks inside of their intestines just for an opportunity to get to the outside hospital for a week, so they can have human contact. I've seen people beaten, lose their life. I mean, if you imagine what's going on with George Floyd in the broad daylight, just imagine what's going on when the camera's turned off behind those closed prison walls in the depths of solitary confinement.
Did you have a window?
No window, no window, nothing but my thoughts, nothing but my thoughts to keep me company. And how I sustained my sanity and was able to tap into my depths was one thing about being in solitary as a child. I still had my imagination. And so what I did was I started dreaming of a future for myself, but I also tapped into my creative ability, and I wrote poems. I challenged myself. I set up Olympic-style obstacle courses with Maya Angelou's poem, Still I Rise. I rewrite that. I rewrite Eminem's Lose Yourself. I create all these different things to keep my sanity going. You know, I like to say, they like to say imagination is more important than knowledge, and it was my imagination that sustained me during that time in solitary confinement.
Can you give us by the way, this is pardon me, this is Ian Manuel. I almost made you the Hamilton star. Ian Manuel. So if your own poetry sustained you, and I don't want to put you in an awkward position, but can you give us a taste?
I definitely can give you a taste. And I wrote this poem called Every Time I Breathe after sitting in solitary confinement, and they let me out for this 1 hour in the TV room. And in prison, they like to use PBS as a punishment because prisoners like to watch entertainment and sports. So if you force them to let you go to the TV room for 1 hour out of the week, they deliberately turn the TV on PBS. Well, it backfired on them this day because PBS was supposed to be boring. And it was a short documentary on called To Be Heard. And it was about spoken word poetry that I'd never been exposed to. And so by me never been exposed to, I soaked it up for that hour, and I went back in my cell and I wrote this poem called Every Time I Breathe, and it goes like this. Every time I breathe, I feel the need to justify my existence, to take this moment that I'm living and enjoy every millisecond in it. My life and my struggles, not many can comprehend it. My desire for freedom burns like a sausage inside a skillet. Tomorrow isn't promised, so I'm thankful for this minute. Though in prison merely existing, it's like my life has been suspended. But that means it's temporary because I haven't been expelled, and I still got a chance as long as I can in and exhale every time I breathe. Every time I breathe, I'm thankful for the oxygen from the trees and little things like little bees that get overlooked until they sting. Every day I'm faced with obstacles that block the progress to my dreams, but the blockades only masquerades like costumes on Halloween. I've been through enough pain to make a sane man just scream. But instead, I take a deep breath and just breathe. Every time I breathe, the cosmos come out of my nostrils like particles of product coming out of your console. My soul is like a chihuahua you didn't include in your carpool. My lungs relax and collapse like a bottom sitting on a bar stool. Every time I breathe, I become an intergalactic being, stepping out of character like a chiropractor, snapping peas. I prayed so many times, it's like I got arthritis in my knees, but I still get down and bow my head because I continue to believe that as long as I can breathe, God's gonna make a change. And my circumstances, the only chances for me to glorify his name. You don't know me, homie, but there's odds I've already overcame. So if praying works, but hurts, then I can stand a little pain. I want to end this part by thanking God for bringing me to these heights. And I make a promise to always honor and cherish this breath of life. Every time I breathe, every time I breathe, every time I breathe.
That was phenomenal.
Thank you,
That
sir.
was unbelievable. Is that Every Time I Breathe poem going to be in My Time Will Come?
Yes, that poem is one of the last poems featured in my forthcoming memoir, My Time Will Come, on May 4th being released. It's in the book. And I'm reading the audio book, so if you guys don't like reading and prefer listening to it, you can buy the audio book as well.
I was just going to say to you, little friendly advice. You better make sure you're recording all of this. Hey, can I ask? I'm curious, and obviously you had a lot of time in a very difficult spot to not only craft that poem but to memorize it. Were you looking at notes?
No, no notes. I memorized like 7 of my poems. I have hundreds of poems, but I have like 7 poems memorized that I can just spew off the top of my head, depending on what the theme calls for. I'm a public speaker as well, and so I find when I'm doing my presentations that the audience just become mesmerized and then more deeply engaged when I engage them with poetry throughout my public speaking.
So, Ian, to bring this full circle, the woman who you shot ended up ultimately coming to your defense. She
Yes.
wanted you released. You were sentenced to life in prison for a crime you committed when you were 13. Obviously, you got out with
Yes.
her support. Tell me about that.
Well, I mean, her support played a role in it, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention that Brian Stevenson and the Equal Justice Initiative. I talk about it in my book, My Time Will Come. Brian, who published Just Mercy and the movie Just Mercy, sent me a letter and asked to take my case for free. And I mean, I had never heard of this guy before, but he appealed my case all the way to the United Supreme Court, who ultimately agreed that sentencing a child to life without the possibility of parole for a non-homicide crime was against the Constitution and a cruel and unusual punishment. And so Debbie's support did play a role, but I would have still been in prison had Brian Stevenson and the Equal Justice Initiative never taken my case and got the U.S. Supreme Court to agree that my sentence was unconstitutional.
And now, you correct me if I'm wrong, but now your cause is to say that no one should be in solitary the way that you were.
No one. When I was sentenced to solitary at age 15, I had no idea that I would spend the next 18 years of my life in the cell the size of a walk-in elevator. The only thing in my mind that kept me thinking that a human being could endure this was Nelson Mandela, because I knew he had served 27 years in prison and 18 years in solitary. So I knew that was my threshold, that I could make it at least 18 years. So I turned to Nelson Mandela and looked at his strength. But yes, my cause is that no juvenile should ever be placed in solitary confinement or with adults, and that if solitary confinement must exist, which I hope it should be nullified, that there has to be a cap placed on the length of stay a person could stay in solitary confinement. And additionally, that the mental health aspects of solitary confinement, everybody doesn't make it out like I did, man, with their sanity, talent, and humanity intact. So we need to get those guys some increased mental health assistance as well as medical care while they're in that setting.
Ian Ian Manuel, the book, May 4, My Time Will Come. My Time Will Come. I wish you good things, and thank you for entertaining us with your poetry.
You're welcome, sir. Thank you for having me.